In the 41st millennium, there is only war. For 10,000 years, humanity has worshipped a corpse god bound to a golden throne, his psychic might the only beacon in an endless storm. But what if the greatest sacrifice in human history never happened? What if the emperor of mankind walked away from the vengeful spirit whole, unbowed, and terrifyingly alive? Some prayers, it seems, should never be answered. The throne world remembers the day the sky burned gold. It was not a metaphor. Every soul on Terra, from the highest lord to the lowest hive scum, felt the psychic shockwave ripple through reality itself. The Astronomicon, that distant lighthouse in the warp, blazed so bright that navigators across the galaxy screamed in their isolation tanks, retinas seared by impossible radiance. For 3 heartbeats, the Immaterium calmed. Demons shrieked and dissolved. Warp storms collapsed into sullen eddies. And then, silence. The Emperor had returned to Terra, not as a broken, dying deity carried by weeping custodians, not as a corpse to be entombed in life-sustaining machinery. He walked down the boarding ramp of the Imperador Somnium, the same flagship that had carried him to Horus's betrayal under his own power, clad in golden armor unmarred by corruption. His face, eternally youthful and terrible in its perfection, showed no wound. Behind him, the vengeful spirit burned in high orbit, a tomb for the War Master who had dared raise a hand against his creator. The Primarch Rogel Dorn knelt immediately, his massive frame shaking with emotions even a gene-forged demigod could not contain. Around him, 10,000 custodians stood in perfect silence, their guardian spears lowered in respect and confusion. They had prepared the Golden Throne. They had readied the psychic machinery that would sustain their master through millennia of agony. Now it sat empty in the Imperial Palace's depths, a golden cage without a prisoner. "My lord," Dorn's voice cracked. "We thought Magnus's warning came too late. We believed you would." "I know what you believed, my son." The Emperor's voice resonated on frequencies beyond mortal hearing. Magnus the Red redeemed himself at the final moment. His psychic intervention shattered Horus's concentration for the span of a single heartbeat. It was enough. The Emperor's gaze swept across the assembled forces, Imperial Guard regiments standing in parade formation, Space Marines from a dozen loyal legions, Mechanicus Magi with their sensor arrays tracking every biological fluctuation of their Omnissiah made manifest. And behind them, in the shadows of the palace spires, the representatives of the emerging Adeptus Ministorum, proto-priests who had begun preaching the Emperor's divinity during the darkest hours of the heresy. They were already a problem he could see festering. "The War Master is dead," the Emperor declared, and his words carried across every Vox channel on Terra, through every astropathic relay, into the minds of every sanctioned psyker in the Imperium. The traitor legions scatter into the eye of terror like the cowards they are. This war is won. Now the true work begins. He had expected relief, celebration. Instead, he felt their confusion like a miasma choking the air. They had spent years preparing for his martyrdom. The narrative was already written, the God Emperor sacrificing himself to save humanity, his eternal vigil from the Golden Throne. It was a story of hope in the darkness, of divine suffering that gave meaning to every human death in his name. And he had ruined it by surviving. The Emperor saw it in their eyes, even his most loyal servants. They didn't know what to do with a god who walked among them, who could question their decisions, who could judge them for the compromises they'd made in his name. The Golden Throne was supposed to be a wall between the Emperor and the Imperium, one that allowed them to project their own interpretation of his will onto a silent, suffering figure. Now that wall was gone. "Lord Dorn," the Emperor said quietly, gesturing for the Primarch to rise. "Summon Malkador." We have much to discuss about the Imperium's evolution during my absence. My lord, the Sigillite is... Dorn hesitated. He was prepared to take your place on the throne, to buy time for your healing. He expended much of his strength maintaining the psychic wards while you fought Horus. The Emperor's expression flickered, something that might have been regret on a more human face. Then we will honor his sacrifice by ensuring it was not in vain. He would want me to fix what is broken. What he didn't say, what he was already calculating with that immortal intellect, was how thoroughly broken things had become. The Imperium he had built on secular truth and scientific enlightenment had fractured during the heresy. In the desperation of survival, humanity had grasped for something to believe in. They had found the Emperor, or rather, they had created a version of him that suited their needs. A god, a divine father, a figure of faith, not reason. He walked through the palace corridors, and the mortal servants pressed themselves against the walls, some weeping openly at the sight of him. Their prayers filled his mind like white noise, pleas for intercession, for miracles, for divine judgment against enemies. The very thing he had spent centuries trying to stamp out had metastasized in his brief absence. The irony was exquisite and terrible. He had forbidden worship, banned religion, purged entire cultures for their superstition. And now, by nearly dying for humanity, he had become the focal point of the largest religion in galactic history. The Emperor paused before a massive stained glass window depicting his battle with Horus. Even now, just days after the event, they were already creating iconography. In the artistic rendering, he stood haloed in golden light, a literal god smiting the arch-traitor with divine lightning. The truth, two gene-wrought warriors locked in psychic and physical combat, both nearly mortal, both bleeding, was already being forgotten. If you crave stories where even gods cannot escape the consequences of their own design, witness what happens when the Imperium's greatest prayer is answered, the Emperor thought, knowing the astropaths would unconsciously transmit that thought to the farthest reaches of his domain. Some chains are forged not from duty, but from devotion, and those are the hardest to break. He had won the war against Horus. Now he faced a far more insidious enemy, the faith of 10 billion souls who desperately needed him to be something he had never wanted to become. The question was whether even the Emperor of mankind could defeat the religion built in his name. The Senatorum Imperialis had not convened in full assembly since the Emperor first departed for the Great Crusade. Now, 3 weeks after his return, the highest authorities of the Imperium gathered in the Hall of Legates, a vast amphitheater where representatives of every major institution sat in tiered rings around a central dais. The Emperor stood at that center, and for the first time in his long existence, he felt the weight of eyes judging him. Lord Commander Militant Sycorax represented the Imperial Army, his chest heavy with campaign ribbons from 100 victories won in the Emperor's name. High Fabricator Zagreus Kane spoke for the Mechanicus of Mars, his augmented form clicking and whirring with barely suppressed agitation. The Navigator houses had sent their Paternoval envoy, an ancient woman whose third eye remained studiously closed, and filling nearly a quarter of the chamber, draped in simple white robes marked with the Aquila, sat the representatives of the Ministorum, the proto-ecclesiarchy that had taken root during the heresy's darkest hours. Cardinal Erebus the Younger, no relation to the traitor word-bearer, though the name itself was a calculated choice, stood as their speaker. He was younger than the Emperor expected, perhaps 40 standard years, with the fervent eyes of a true believer. The kind of man who would burn worlds to prove his faith. "My Emperor," Erebus began, and the title itself was an assertion, not "my Lord" or "Master of Mankind," but "my Emperor," possessive, intimate, religious. "We rejoice at your divine return. Truly, you have proven yourself the God Emperor prophesied in. I am not a god. The Emperor's words cut through the chamber like a chainsword through flesh. Several of the Ministorum representatives physically recoiled. Erebus himself went pale, but recovered with the practiced ease of a politician. Forgive my presumption, but, my lord, you command psychic power beyond all others. You created the Primarchs from your own genetic template. You endure across millennia without aging. You walked from a battle that should have killed you without a mark. If these are not the attributes of divinity, they are the attributes of advanced science and biological engineering, the Emperor interrupted. I'm an evolved human. Powerful, yes. Immortal by most standards, perhaps. But I am not supernatural. I do not demand worship. I never have. Fabricator Kane's mechadendrites twitched in what might have been approval. The representatives of the secular institutions, military, administrative, exploratory, straightened in their seats. They remembered the imperial truth, the Emperor's doctrine of rationalism and human supremacy through science, not superstition. But the Ministorum delegation did not move. If anything, they leaned forward with increased intensity. Then explain the miracles, another priest called out, a woman with the scars of a former ecclesiarchy warrior. On Calth, after the word-bearer's betrayal, an entire battalion reported seeing a golden figure lead them from the catacombs. On Proxima Mortis, a guardsman touched the Aquila at his throat and his mortal wound closed. On Terra itself, during the final siege, entire regiments reported visions of your face in the flames, granting them strength when all hope was lost. The Emperor felt the psychic resonance behind her words. She believed. They all believed. And worse, they were not lying about the miracles. He had felt those moments during the heresy, desperate souls calling out in his name, and his own unconscious psychic presence responding, channeling through the warp to grant them impossible strength or fortune. He had become a god by accident, through 10 billion acts of faith, creating a warp presence that responded to prayer. What you describe are psychic phenomena, he said carefully. The warp responds to strong emotions and collective belief. When billions of humans concentrate their hope and desperation on a single figure, it creates a resonance. I did not create those miracles consciously. The human species did, through the sheer weight of their need. Semantics, Erebus said softly, and there was steel beneath the silk. Whether you claim divinity or not, the effect is the same. Humanity believes in the God Emperor. That belief has held the Imperium together through the worst catastrophe in our history. It has given soldiers the courage to die in your name. It has unified 1 million disparate worlds under a single banner. You may deny your godhood, but billions would die to prove it. The threat was implicit but clear. The Emperor could declare himself secular until his last breath, but the faith had taken on a life of its own, and the priests who administered that faith had power now, real, temporal power, backed by billions of devoted followers. Lord Commander Sycorax, the Emperor turned to the military representative. Your assessment of the Imperium's current strategic position. The soldier stood, grateful for the shift to practical matters. Grim but survivable, my lord. The traitor legions have retreated into the Eye of Terror. We lack the resources for a sustained offensive into that hellspace. Our priority must be consolidation, reclaiming lost worlds, rebuilding shattered sectors, restoring the supply lines that sustained the Great Crusade. And morale among the ranks? Sycorax hesitated. The common soldiery believe, that is, they have been told, that I died for their sins and watch over them from the Golden Throne, the Emperor finished. That every lasgun shot fired in my name carries divine purpose. That death in service to the Emperor guarantees a place at my side in the afterlife. It has proven remarkably effective for unit cohesion, Sycorax admitted quietly. The Emperor turned to Fabricator Kane. And the Mechanicus, do you also believe I am divine? The tech priest's optical implants focused with audible clicks. The Mechanicus believes in the machine god and the Omnissiah, the physical embodiment of the machine god's will. You have demonstrated mastery over technology that approaches the sacred STC templates. You created the Primarchs through bioalchemy we cannot replicate. Whether you are divine in the theological sense is irrelevant. You are the Omnissiah. This is sufficient. I am not your Omnissiah either, the Emperor said, but there was weariness in his tone now. I am a scientist who unlocked genetic secrets through millennia of study. A distinction without difference, Kane replied. You command what we worship. Therefore, you are what we worship. The circular logic was maddening precisely because it was effective. The Emperor had spent the heresy fighting chaos, literal gods born from emotion and worship in the warp. He had seen what happened when faith became reality, when belief shaped the immaterium into sentient malevolence. Now his own Imperium was creating the same thing, except with him as the focus. If he allowed it to continue, he might actually become a god, a warp entity sustained by human devotion, powerful enough to rival the chaos gods themselves. The thought was simultaneously tempting and horrifying. There is another matter, the Navigator Envoy spoke for the first time, her voice aged and hollow. The Astronomicon. It burns brighter than ever with your return, my lord. Our kind can navigate with unprecedented precision. But the Golden Throne sits empty. The Mechanicus designed it to sustain you and channel your psychic might. If you do not occupy it, then we find another way, the Emperor said flatly. The throne was meant to be temporary. A prison is still a prison, whether its bars are golden or iron. Without the throne's amplification, maintaining the Astronomicon will require you to dedicate significant psychic energy continuously, Fabricator Kane noted. You will be unable to lead military campaigns, conduct research, or govern directly. You will effectively become what the throne would have made you, a psychic beacon, nothing more. Unless, Cardinal Erebus interjected smoothly, you allow the priesthood to share the burden. If the faithful pray to you, channel their devotion through ritual and liturgy, you could draw on that collective spiritual energy to sustain the Astronomicon, the God Emperor fueled by the faith of his children. Poetic, no? The Emperor understood the trap immediately. Accept divine status and let the priests manage the faith industry, or exhaust himself maintaining the Astronomicon alone and become functionally useless as a leader. Either way, the Imperium would slip from his direct control. This council is adjourned, he declared. I will make my decision regarding the throne and the Astronomicon within the week. Until then, continue consolidation operations. Dismissed. As the chamber emptied, the Emperor remained on the dais, staring at the golden aquila emblazoned on the far wall, the symbol he had created as a representation of unity and human achievement. Now it was a religious icon, worn as a ward against demons, prayed to like a holy relic. He had created the Imperium to save humanity from the darkness. Instead, he had given them new chains of faith, devotion, and dogma. And the cruelest irony was that those chains might be the only thing holding the Imperium together. Rogel Dorn approached quietly, his footsteps heavy despite his attempt at stealth. Father, they will not let you dismantle what they have built. I know, the Emperor said. The question is whether I should even try. The Emperor stood in the Hall of Victories, a vast gallery within the Imperial Palace where the achievements of the Great Crusade had been immortalized. Statues of Primarchs lined the walls, 18 of them, For even now the Imperium had not officially struck the traitors from record. That would require acknowledging the sheer scale of the betrayal, and bureaucracies preferred comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths. He paused before the statue of Roboute Guilliman, carved from Macragge marble with painful attention to detail. The Primarch of the Ultramarines stood in full armor, one hand resting on a data slate, the other raised in a gesture of command. The sculptor had captured something essential about his son, the blend of warrior and administrator. The rational mind that saw logistics as the true foundation of empire. "You would have appreciated the irony," the Emperor said to the stone face. "I built you to be generals and governors. Instead, half became gods of chaos, and the other half are becoming saints in a religion I never wanted. Talking to statues, father. The Mechanicus would call that animism." The Emperor turned sharply. The voice was impossible. Guilliman was light years away, consolidating Ultramar after the Shadow Crusade's devastation. Yet there he stood, fully armored in the blue and gold of the Thebenthinith Legion, his expression guarded in that peculiar way he had when preparing to deliver unwelcome news. "Roboute, I did not expect you for another 3 months. I commandeered the fastest warp-capable vessel in Ultramar the moment I received word of your return." Guilliman approached, and despite his transhuman size, he seemed somehow diminished in the Emperor's presence. "We need to talk, privately." The Emperor gestured, and psychic wards snapped into place around them, a bubble of reality insulated from listening devices, astropathic eavesdropping, and even the more exotic forms of surveillance the Imperium had developed. Within this space, only truth could exist. "You're going to tell me I can't undo what has been done," the Emperor said. "That the Ministorum is too powerful, that the faith is too widespread, that attempting to restore the Imperial truth would fracture the Imperium worse than Horus's betrayal." Guilliman's silence was answer enough. The Primarch moved to stand beside his father, both of them staring at the statues. "Do you know what I found when I returned to Macragge? Shrines, thousands of them, every hive level, every agri-settlement, every orbital station. They all had shrines dedicated to you, not to me, despite Ultramar being my domain. To you. And you allowed this. I tried to stop it at first," Guilliman admitted. "I gave speeches about the Imperial truth. I ordered the shrines dismantled. Do you know what happened? Riots, civil unrest, 3 separate assassination attempts by zealots who believed I was a heretic trying to deny the God Emperor's divinity. My own Space Marines had to fire on civilian populations to maintain order." The Emperor's jaw tightened. "So you capitulated?" "I adapted," Guilliman corrected, his tone sharp. "There is a difference. The people need something to believe in, father. The Imperial truth, rationalism, atheism, human supremacy through science. It worked during the Great Crusade when we were winning. When there was visible progress, new worlds brought into compliance, Xenos threats being systematically eliminated. But during the heresy, when demons poured from the warp and brother fought brother and nothing made sense anymore, he turned to face the Emperor fully. They needed faith, not in abstract ideals or secular progress. They needed to believe that their suffering had meaning, that you, somewhere, were watching, that if they died fighting in your name, it mattered. The Imperial Creed gave them that. At the cost of turning me into exactly what I fought against, the Emperor said coldly. I spent centuries eliminating religion from human civilization. I purged the Covenant of Colchis. I destroyed the Cathedral of Enlightenment on Kur. I forbade the word-bearers from spreading their Lectitio Divinitatus. And now, because it was convenient, you allowed that same poison to spread unchecked. It kept the Imperium together. Guilliman's voice rose, a rare display of emotion from the most rational of Primarchs. Malkador was dying maintaining the psychic wards. Dorn was barely holding Terra against the siege. The supply lines were collapsing. Entire sectors were going dark, and in that darkness, the faith in the God Emperor was the only thing that gave Imperial Guard regiments the will to hold the line one more day. He stepped closer, his massive form radiating intensity. You taught us to be pragmatic, to use whatever tools were necessary to achieve victory. Well, Father, the Imperial Creed was the most effective tool we had. It unified disparate cultures under a single banner. It gave commissars a reason to execute deserters that even broken soldiers would accept. It transformed civilians into willing martyrs who would sabotage enemy positions knowing they'd die. And now it has made me a prisoner in a different sense, the Emperor said quietly. Bound not by machinery, but by the expectations of billions. They do not want a leader, Robout. They want a god, and gods do not compromise. Gods do not admit mistakes. Gods certainly do not tell their worshippers that everything they believe is a lie. Guilliman was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that even a Primarch rarely shouldered. There is something else you need to know. During the heresy, I compiled comprehensive data on every Imperial world's response to the crisis. Worlds that embraced the Imperial Creed early showed 37% higher survival rates than those that maintained strict adherence to the Imperial truth. Their populations fought harder, their militaries accepted harsher losses, their civilians endured greater privation without rebellion. Correlation is not causation, the Emperor countered. No, but pattern recognition is your specialty, Father. You know what those numbers mean. Guilliman pulled a data slate from his armor's storage compartment and offered it. I have detailed breakdowns by sector, by culture, by previous religious history. The pattern holds. Faith in you, specifically, faith that sees you as divine, creates measurably more effective Imperial citizens. The Emperor took the slate but did not look at it. He already knew what it would show. He had suspected it even before Guilliman confirmed it. The human species, traumatized by Xenos threats, chaos, corruption, and civil war, had regressed to an evolutionary default. Tribalism reinforced by religious fervor. It was adaptive behavior for a hostile universe. You are asking me to become the lie, he said. I am asking you to be what they need you to be, Guilliman replied. Not what you want to be. What they need. And what happens in 1,000 years? 10,000? When the Imperial Creed has calcified into the same oppressive dogma that choked old Earth during the Age of Strife. When innovation is heresy and questioning becomes blasphemy. When the Ministorum wields more power than the Administratum because they claim to speak for a silent god. Guilliman met his gaze without flinching. Then you will still be here to correct course. You are immortal, Father. The priests are not. The zealots are not. You can guide the faith's evolution, steer it away from the worst excesses, but only if you accept that it exists and cannot be simply erased. The Emperor walked to the far end of the gallery, where a window overlooked the Imperial Palace's sprawling cityscape. Millions of lights flickered in the twilight, each one representing lives. Families, soldiers, workers, all bound together by a shared belief that he was their divine protector. I met a philosopher once, he said, not turning around. In ancient Greece, before even my birth, he argued that the best lies were those that contained enough truth to be believed, but simplified reality enough to be useful. Noble lies, he called them, necessary fictions that held society together. Plato, Guilliman said immediately. Of course he would recognize the reference. I rejected his philosophy then. I believed that humanity could transcend the need for comforting fictions, that rational thought, properly applied, would replace superstition. The Emperor's reflection in the armored glass looked ancient and tired. Perhaps I was wrong, or perhaps I was right, but the universe is too cruel to allow such luxuries. There is a third option, Guilliman ventured carefully. You were right for the civilization you wanted to build, but wrong for the civilization we have. The Imperium is not what you envisioned. It cannot be, not after the heresy. We can mourn what was lost, or we can build something functional from what remains. The Emperor turned back to his son. And if I refuse? If I stand in the Senatorum tomorrow and declare the imperial truth restored? If I order the Ministorum dissolved and the shrines destroyed? Civil war, Guilliman said flatly. Not immediately, but within a decade. The faithful will see you as an impostor, a demon wearing the Emperor's face. The Ministorum will declare you corrupted by chaos. Entire Space Marine chapters that revere you as the God Emperor will turn against you to save you from whatever they believe has possessed you. The Imperium will shatter, and this time there will be no external enemy to unite against. We will destroy ourselves over theology. The Emperor absorbed this, his ancient mind running countless scenarios and simulations. Every projection reached the same conclusion. Guilliman was not exaggerating. The faith had metastasized beyond any single institution's control. It was woven into the Imperium's psyche now, a load-bearing element of the entire structure. Remove it, and everything collapsed. You have become quite the strategist, the Emperor said, with something that might have been pride or resignation. I learned from the best, Guilliman replied. Multiple sources, actually. You taught me grand strategy. Horus taught me political maneuvering, and the heresy taught me that sometimes there is no good choice, only less catastrophic ones. The Emperor moved to his son and placed a hand on his armored shoulder, a rare gesture of physical connection. I need time to consider this, to find a path that preserves some element of what I intended without destroying what you have built. Take what time you need. But Father... Guilliman hesitated, then pressed forward. The longer you delay, the more the factions will solidify their positions. The Ministorum is already composing liturgies that incorporate your return. They are writing you into the mythology, even as you stand here debating it. Every day you do not explicitly reject divinity is a day they claim as implicit acceptance, meaning I have already lost by not acting immediately, meaning the window for clean solutions closed the moment you walked off that ship without dying, Guilliman said. Now we are in the realm of damage control and pragmatic compromise. Welcome to governance, Father. It is considerably less glorious than conquest. The Emperor released his son and moved toward the gallery exit. Summon Dorn, Khan if he has returned from his pursuit of traitors, and Vulcan if the Salamanders can spare him. I want input from Primarchs who were here during the worst of the siege. They will have perspectives you lack. As you command, Guilliman said, though his tone suggested he already knew what those brothers would say. The Emperor paused at the threshold. Roboute, when you look at these statues, do you see your brothers, or do you see the legends they have become? Guilliman gazed at the marble figures, Sanguinius with his wings spread, Lionel Johnson with his blade raised, Leman Russ mid-howl. I see both, and I mourn that the legends are already consuming the truth. Then we are both prisoners, the Emperor said softly. You are trapped by duty to an Imperium that no longer resembles our vision. And I am trapped by the faith of those who need me to be something I am not. He left without waiting for a response. Behind him, Guilliman stood alone among the statues of his brothers, both living and dead, loyal and traitor, and wondered if even the Emperor's immortal wisdom could navigate the labyrinth they had all created. The Emperor descended into the depths of the Imperial Palace, past layers of security that would have stopped any being in the galaxy except him. The Golden Throne sat in a chamber designed by Malkador the Sigillite himself, a vast hall of psychically reactive gold and wraithbone, borrowed from Eldar technology and merged with ancient human designs recovered from the Dark Age. It was magnificent and terrible, a machine capable of channeling enough psychic energy to tear holes in reality itself. And it sat empty. The Emperor approached the throne slowly, feeling the latent power thrumming through its mechanisms. The Mechanicus had already begun the maintenance rituals, even though no occupant required sustaining. They treated the machine itself as holy, anointing its circuits with sacred oils and chanting the litany of ignition despite having no one to ignite. It looks lonely, doesn't it? The Emperor didn't turn. He recognized the voice instantly, though it should have been impossible. Magnus. The Primarch of the Thousand Suns stepped from the shadows, his single eye glowing with barely contained warp energy. His crimson armor was scorched and cracked, his psychic presence flickering like a candle in a storm. He looked diminished, a shadow of the being who had once commanded legions of sorcerers and reshaped reality with a thought. "You should not be here," the Emperor said flatly. "Terra's wards would have incinerated any traitor who attempted to—" "I am not here," Magnus interrupted. "Not physically. This is a psychic projection, Father. A fragment of my consciousness that managed to slip through the cracks in your defenses during the moment of your return. The psychic shockwave you created provided an opportunity." The Emperor studied the projection carefully. It was sophisticated work, far beyond even Magnus's considerable skill before the heresy. His wayward son had been learning from the warp itself, drinking deep from forbidden knowledge that would have destroyed lesser minds. "If you have come to gloat about your betrayal, I came to warn you," Magnus said, and there was genuine anguish in his voice. "And to apologize. I understand now what I did wrong. Breaking through the psychic wards to warn you of Horus's betrayal. It seemed so obvious at the time. Necessary. But I shattered the Webway project. I opened Terra to demonic invasion. I gave the Chaos Gods exactly what they wanted." "You did," the Emperor confirmed coldly. "Your arrogance nearly doomed our species." "My arrogance was inherited," Magnus shot back, and there was a flash of the old fire. "You taught us to push boundaries, to seek knowledge regardless of cost, to believe that we were above the petty rules that constrained lesser beings. Then you punished me for becoming exactly what you created." The Emperor's expression remained impassive, but something flickered behind his eyes, recognition, perhaps, or regret. "You broke the one rule that mattered. I warned you about the warp's dangers. I told you that some knowledge was too poisonous to pursue. You told me nothing." Magnus's projection flared with psychic intensity. "You kept secrets. You forbade questions. You expected blind obedience from sons you designed to be curious, intelligent, and powerful. Did you truly believe we would not investigate the mysteries you refused to explain?" The Emperor was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that transcended mere sound. "I kept secrets because some truths are corrosive. The Chaos Gods exist because sentient beings give them power through emotion and worship. Telling my sons about them would have made them vulnerable. Awareness is the first step toward corruption. I tried to starve the ruinous powers of recognition and acknowledgement. And instead, we stumbled into their traps blind," Magnus said bitterly. "Lorgar discovered them on his own and founded a religion in your name because you gave him nothing else to believe in. Horus fell because he didn't understand what was corrupting him until it was too late. Fulgrim embraced damnation because he thought he was pursuing perfection. We were children playing with weapons we didn't recognize." "You were weapons yourselves," the Emperor countered. "Created for a purpose, generals and conquerors, not philosophers. I gave you everything you needed to fulfill your roles. Except meaning. Magnus's projection moved closer, his single eye boring into his father's face. Do you know what the Chaos Gods showed me? What convinced me to accept their patronage after Prospero burned? They showed me that you planned to discard us, that once the Great Crusade was complete, the Primarchs would become obsolete. Dangerous relics of a wartime era, too powerful to integrate into peacetime civilization. The Emperor's silence spoke volumes. It was true, Magnus breathed, at least partially. You had no place for us in the secular utopia you envisioned. What use are gene-forged warlords in an age of enlightenment and rational governance? We were tools, Father, designed for a specific task to be set aside when that task was complete. You were my sons, the Emperor said, and for the first time, emotion cracked through his perfect control. But you were also weapons of mass destruction, walking among a population I was trying to save. The Primarchs represented singular points of failure. If corrupted, each of you could destroy entire sectors. The risk was always unacceptable. I had not yet determined how to resolve that paradox. And now half of us are damned, and the other half are becoming saints, Magnus said with dark humor. The paradox resolved itself, just not the way you intended. But I didn't come here to litigate the past. I came because you're about to make a terrible mistake. Explain. Magnus gestured toward the Golden Throne. You're considering sitting on it, not because you need to, but because you think it will allow you to maintain the Astronomicon while remaining secular. You'll tell yourself it's just a psychic amplifier, nothing mystical about it. A tool, like any other. Your point. The throne is a trap, Magnus said urgently. Not physically. You could survive its power drain indefinitely, but symbolically. The moment you ascend that throne, every prayer, every act of devotion, every scrap of faith in the God Emperor across the Imperium will channel through you. Not just passively, but actively. You will feel their worship like a physical weight. And in the warp, Father, belief shapes reality. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. You're suggesting that becoming the focus of worship will transform me into an actual god. I'm not suggesting. I'm telling you what I have seen from within the warp itself. Magnus's projection flickered with intensity. The Chaos Gods are watching. They know what the Imperial Creed represents, the potential birth of a fifth Chaos God, or perhaps something even more powerful. An entity of order to oppose their chaos. They fear this. They crave this. Because either way, you will become one of them, a being sustained by and bound to human emotion, unable to exist independently of their faith. Then I simply refuse to ascend the throne, the Emperor said. And the Astronomicon gutters, Magnus countered. Billions die in warp storms. The Imperium fragments. Chaos wins by default. You have no good choices, Father. Only catastrophic ones dressed in different colors. The Emperor turned away from Magnus's projection, pacing around the throne like a predator circling prey. There must be an alternative, a method to maintain the Astronomicon without channeling the faith of the masses. The Eldar once maintained their own psychic beacons without... The Eldar had the webway, Magnus interrupted. And look how well that turned out for them. Slaanesh was born from their hubris. Are you truly so arrogant that you believe humanity is immune to the same fate? I'm trying to prevent that fate. By becoming what you hate? Magnus shook his head. I have seen your possible futures, Father. I have watched them branch and split across 1,000,000 timelines. In the ones where you sit on the throne and accept divinity, the Imperium survives, but becomes something unrecognizable, a theocratic nightmare where innovation is heresy and questioning is blasphemy. In the ones where you refuse, the Imperium collapses within generations. Both paths lead to damnation, just at different speeds. The Emperor stopped pacing. Then what do you suggest? You did not project yourself across the galaxy just to tell me I'm doomed either way. Magnus's projection moved to stand beside the throne, one ethereal hand resting on its armrest. There is a third path. Dangerous, probably impossible. But it's the only one that preserves both the Imperium's stability and your vision of secular humanity. I'm listening. The Webway, Magnus said simply. The project I destroyed. If it could be repaired, if humanity could transition to using the Webway for travel instead of the warp, the Astronomicon becomes obsolete. No psychic beacon required, no channeling of faith. The Imperium maintains cohesion through material infrastructure rather than spiritual dependence. The Emperor's expression darkened. The Webway breach you created allows demons to pour directly into the Imperial Palace. Malkador spent the entire heresy maintaining wards to contain them. The corruption has spread through thousands of kilometers of Webway tunnels. Even if I dedicated every resource to the repair effort, it would take centuries. Millennia, perhaps. But you're immortal, Magnus pointed out. And now you're whole, not dying on a throne, but active and capable. With the right resources, the knowledge locked in the Black Library, perhaps cooperation with the Craftworlders who still maintain portions of the Webway, the full might of the Mechanicus, it becomes possible. The Eldar would never cooperate, the Emperor said flatly. They blame humanity for attracting the ruinous power's attention. They see us as upstart primates playing with forces we cannot comprehend. They're not entirely wrong, Magnus said with grim humor. But they also recognize that a stable Imperium is preferable to a chaos-corrupted galaxy. Approach Eldrad Ulthrin. He plays the long game, just like you. He might see the value in helping repair what I broke, especially if the alternative is watching you transform into a chaos god of order. The Emperor studied his wayward son's projection. Why are you helping me? You serve the chaos gods now. This advice works against their interests. Magnus's single eye dimmed with something that might have been sorrow. I serve Tzeentch, the architect of fate, and paradoxically, this serves his purposes. Change, transformation, the endless branching of possible futures, that is his domain. A static Imperium ossified by dogma is antithetical to everything he represents. But more than that, he paused, and for a moment, he was simply a son speaking to his father. I destroyed the Webway project through arrogance and ignorance. If there's any chance to undo that mistake, to give you back the future I stole, then perhaps some part of me can be redeemed, even damned as I am. The Emperor regarded Magnus for a long moment. You understand that if you are being truthful, I will dedicate resources to the Webway's repair. Resources that could be used to hunt you and your legion. I understand, Magnus said. Consider it penance, or self-destructive guilt, or even Tzeentchian manipulation. I can no longer distinguish my own motivations from the whispers in my mind. But the information is true, regardless of my reasons for sharing it. His projection began to fade, the psychic energy sustaining it, exhausting itself. One more thing, Father. The Imperial Creed is not entirely a lie. When billions of humans pray to you, you do respond, unconsciously, through psychic resonance. You save Imperial Guard regiments through impossible coincidences. You grant strength to those who call your name in desperation. You are already becoming the god they worship, one answered prayer at a time. The question is whether you acknowledge what you are becoming, or pretend it isn't happening until it's too late to matter. Magnus vanished completely, leaving only a faint scent of ozone and warp corruption. The Emperor stood alone in the throne room, surrounded by walls of gold and wraithbone, staring at the empty seat that represented both salvation and damnation. 3 paths lay before him. Accept divinity and guide the faith from within. Reject divinity and watch the Imperium fracture, or attempt the impossible restoration of the webway and obsolete the need for divine intervention entirely. All three paths were minefields of cascading consequences. All three required sacrifices that would haunt him for millennia. He thought of Guilliman's pragmatic argument for accepting the faith, of Magnus's warning about transformation into a warp entity, of the millions who would die if he made the wrong choice. Some chains are forged from devotion, he murmured to the empty throne, and those are the hardest to break. But perhaps, just perhaps, they could be loosened. One link at a time, one impossible project at a time. The Emperor turned and walked from the chamber, leaving the golden throne empty behind him. He had a decision to make, but it would not be made in this place of temptation and compromise. It would be made in the light, where humanity could see exactly what their god chose to become. The Emperor convened an emergency session of the War Council in the Sanctum Imperialis, a chamber shielded by so many layers of psychic and technological protection that even the Chaos Gods themselves could not peer inside. Around the obsidian table sat the Imperium's most powerful figures: Rogel Dorn, Robout Guilliman, Jagatai Khan, Vulcan, High Fabricator, Zagreus Kane, Lord Commander Militant Sycorax, and Malkador the Sigillite, barely alive, sustained by machinery and sheer force of will after his near sacrifice on the Golden Throne. Cardinal Erebus the Younger was notably absent. This meeting was not for the faithful. "Gentlemen," the Emperor began without preamble, "I have determined our path forward. You will not like it. Some of you will consider it heresy. Others will think it madness. But it is the only solution that preserves both the Imperium's stability and the principles upon which it was founded." Dorn leaned forward, his stoic features carved from granite determination. "We await your command, Father." "The Golden Throne will remain empty," the Emperor declared. "I will not ascend it. Instead, I will maintain the Astronomicon through direct psychic effort, while simultaneously dedicating the Imperium's resources to repairing the webway breach Magnus created. Once the webway is restored and expanded to connect all major Imperial worlds, the Astronomicon becomes obsolete. Humanity travels through material tunnels rather than the warp, eliminating our dependence on psychic navigation entirely. Silence fell across the chamber like a shroud. Fabricator Kane's mechadendrites twitched violently. "Lord, the webway project was lost during the heresy. The breach in the Imperial Palace bleeds demons into reality constantly. The corruption has spread across thousands of kilometers of ancient infrastructure. Even with the full resources of the Mechanicus, repair would take millennia," the Emperor finished. "I am aware, but I have millennia. And more importantly, the alternative is allowing myself to become a warp god sustained by human worship. That outcome is unacceptable." Guilliman's tactical mind was already racing through logistics. "The resource allocation required would be staggering. We're still rebuilding from the heresy. Entire sectors need pacification. The traitor legions must be hunted. And you're proposing diverting those resources to a construction project that won't bear fruit for centuries." "Yes. The Imperium will perceive it as abandonment," Guilliman pressed. "You return from your confrontation with Horus, refuse to sit on the throne prepared for you, and immediately vanish into a reconstruction project while the galaxy burns. The Ministorum will have a field day painting you as indifferent to humanity's suffering. Then we give them something else to focus on," the Emperor said, and turned to Dorn. "Rogel, you will oversee the public-facing elements of Imperial governance, military operations, sector pacification, reconstruction efforts. You are my Praetorian, the Emperor's fist when I cannot be present. The people will see you as my direct representative, my will made manifest." Dorn's expression never changed, but his voice carried the weight of a mountain settling into place. "I will not fail you, Father." "Robout," the Emperor continued, "you will codify the Imperium's administrative structure. The Codex Astartes you've been developing, expand it, not just for Space Marines, but for every branch of Imperial governance. Create systems that function without requiring my direct oversight. Transform the Imperium from a personality cult into an institution that survives leadership transitions." Guilliman nodded slowly. "A government of laws, not men. Or in this case, not God Emperors. It aligns with what I've already begun. But Father, this will take decades to implement properly, and it directly contradicts the Ministorum's narrative that you are an active, interventionist deity." "Which brings us to the Ministorum itself," the Emperor said, and his tone hardened. "I will not forbid the Imperial Creed. I lack the political capital to enforce such a ban, and the attempt would trigger civil war. But neither will I endorse it. The Ministorum will be tolerated as a social institution, allowed to conduct their rituals, maintain their shrines, preach their sermons. But they will have no official governmental authority, no seats in the Senatorum, no military forces beyond ceremonial guards, no legal power to declare heresy or enforce theological compliance." Cardinal Erebus would have apoplexy if he were present to hear this. Malcador stirred, his withered form shifting in the life support throne that kept his broken body functional. His voice emerged as a papery whisper amplified by Vox technology. "A compromise that satisfies no one. The faithful will feel betrayed that you do not embrace them. The secularists will feel betrayed that you permit worship at all. And the Ministorum will spend every waking moment attempting to expand their influence despite your restrictions." "Correct," the Emperor acknowledged. "But it is a sustainable compromise. The faith continues, contained and monitored. The Imperium's governance remains secular in structure, and I avoid the trap of becoming what they worship." Jagatai Khan spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the windswept plains of Chogoris. "You are buying time, Father, kicking the problem down the road while you chase the dream of the Webway. But time is a resource that empires often squander. What happens if the Webway cannot be repaired? What happens if the breach is too corrupt, the damage too extensive, the Eldar technology too alien for even you to master?" "Then I will have failed," the Emperor said simply. "And the Imperium will have to find another solution. But at least I will have tried to preserve the future I envisioned, rather than surrendering to expedient compromise." Vulcan, who had remained silent throughout the discussion, finally spoke. His voice was warm despite the grim topic, carrying the forge heat of Nocturne. "Father, there is wisdom in acknowledging what you have become, whether you intended it or not. The people do not love an ideal. They love you, the individual, the being who created the Primarchs, who led the Great Crusade, who nearly died to stop Horus. Rejecting their devotion, even in this measured way, will hurt them." "I am not rejecting their devotion," the Emperor corrected. "I am refusing to exploit it. There is a difference. They may love me, Vulcan, but I will not allow that love to transform into the same poisonous worship that fed the Chaos Gods. Human emotion is powerful precisely because it is free. The moment it becomes codified ritual, the moment it becomes obligation rather than choice, it begins to warp into something darker. And yet, the Imperial Creed already exists," Vulcan countered gently. "The prayers are already being said, the rituals already established. You can guide that devotion towards something constructive, or you can abandon it and watch it curdle into fanaticism without your moderating influence." The Emperor was silent for a long moment, recognizing the trap. Vulcan was right. By refusing to engage with the faith, he would lose all ability to shape its evolution. But engaging with it, meant acknowledging its legitimacy, which would strengthen the very institution he wanted to contain. "Then I will make occasional appearances," the Emperor said finally. "Public addresses. Demonstrations of power that can be interpreted as divine intervention or advanced psychic science, depending on the observer's perspective. I will be present enough to prevent the Ministorum from rewriting my entire philosophy, but absent enough to avoid becoming the centerpiece of their liturgy." "Threading a needle in a hurricane," Guilliman muttered. "But it might work. Barely." Dorn turned to the Emperor with characteristic directness. "What of the demons in the webway? The corruption Magnus unleashed? You cannot repair the infrastructure while fighting off constant demonic incursions." "That is where the unpleasant part of this plan comes in," the Emperor said. "I need Magnus." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Absolutely not," Dorn said, his voice like granite grinding. "Magnus is a traitor. He serves the ruinous powers. He shattered our defenses and allowed demons to pour into Terra itself. You cannot trust." "I can use him," the Emperor interrupted. "Magnus knows the webway's architecture better than anyone except myself. He studied it obsessively before the heresy. He understands both the technology and the warp corruption infesting it. More importantly, his guilt over destroying the project may be the one leverage I have over a son who has already damned himself." "This is madness," Guilliman said flatly. "Even if Magnus were willing to help, he is bound to Tzeentch. Everything he does serves chaos, whether he realizes it or not. You would be inviting corruption directly into the heart of your most important project." "I am aware of the risks," the Emperor said. "But consider the alternative. Without Magnus's expertise, the webway repair could take 5,000 years instead of 1,000. Every century of delay is another century the Imperium remains dependent on the Astronomicon, and by extension, dependent on my psychic power being channeled through faith. The longer that continues, the more I risk transforming into exactly what the Ministorum claims I am." Malcador's withered hand tapped the armrest of his throne with surprising force. "You are gambling the future of humanity on the possibility that a damned Primarch can experience redemption through engineering. That is not strategy, old friend. That is hope, and hope is a fickle foundation for empire." "Then what would you have me do?" The Emperor's voice carried an edge of frustration, a rare crack in his perfect composure. "Sit on the golden throne and become a god? Watch as the imperial truth is strangled by dogma and superstition. Let the Mechanicus worship me as the Omnissiah, while the Ministorum worship me as the God Emperor, each interpreting my will to suit their agenda. I did not spend 40,000 years preparing humanity for the stars just to become a divine tyrant." "You already are a divine tyrant," Malcador said quietly. "The question is whether you admit it and shape what that means, or deny it and let others shape it for you." The Emperor slumped slightly, an almost imperceptible movement, but from a being who normally radiated absolute certainty, it was shocking. For a moment, he looked not like the master of mankind, but like an ancient man carrying the weight of 40 millennia. "I know what I am," he said softly. "I know what I have become. Every prayer that reaches me, every soldier who dies screaming my name, every miracle attributed to my intervention, I feel them all. The warp resonance Magnus warned me about is already beginning. I am accreting a divine presence in the Immaterium, built from the collective faith of billions. If I sit on the throne and channel that energy, the transformation will accelerate exponentially. Within a century, I will be a warp entity first and a biological being second." He met each of their eyes in turn. "The webway is my last chance to remain what I am, to guide humanity as a leader, rather than as a god who answers prayers and demands sacrifices. If I fail, If the corruption is too extensive, or Magnus betrays me, or the project proves impossible, then yes, I will ascend the throne and become the deity they worship. But I will have exhausted every other option first. Jagatai Khan rose from his seat, his movements fluid and purposeful. Then let us not waste time debating the inevitable. If you are committed to this path, Father, then we must move quickly. The longer you remain visible and inactive, the more the Ministorum's narrative solidifies. Announce your intentions publicly, establish Dorn as your Praetorian, and descend into the webway before the faithful have time to organize opposition. Khan is right, Gilliman added reluctantly. Speed is our ally here. Present it as a fait accompli rather than a proposal open for debate. The Imperium respects strength and decisiveness. Show them both. The Emperor nodded slowly. Then it is decided. I will address the Senatorum tomorrow. Rogel, prepare to assume public-facing command. Robout, begin drafting the administrative codices. Vulcan, I need you to work with the Mechanicus. They respect you as a craftsman. Help them understand that the Webway project serves the Omnissiah's will. He turned to Fabricator Kane. Hi, Fabricator. I require every schematic, every data fragment, every scrap of knowledge the Mechanicus possesses regarding Webway technology. STCs from the Dark Age, Eldar texts from Xenos archives, theoretical models from your most radical tech priests. I want it all compiled and ready for my review within the month. Kane's optical implants flared. It shall be done, Omnissiah, though I must note that many of our most knowledgeable tech priests perished during the heresy. The Webway project's lead researchers were killed when the breach occurred. Then we train new ones, the Emperor said. This is a multi-generational project. The researchers who begin it will not live to see it completed, but their successors will inherit their knowledge, and their successors after them. We are building toward a future measured in centuries, not years. Malkador stirred again, his voice barely a whisper. And what of me, old friend? What role does a dying sigillite play in your grand reconstruction? The Emperor moved to stand beside Malkador's throne, placing a hand on his oldest companion's shoulder. You rest, Malkador. You have earned it 1,000 times over. The Astronomicon nearly killed you. I will not ask you to sacrifice anything more. Rest is death for one such as I, Malkador replied. Give me purpose, or give me nothing at all. The Emperor was silent for a moment, then nodded. Very well. You will serve as my eyes and ears among the Ministorum. They will attempt to expand their influence despite my restrictions. You will monitor, document, and report. Not to suppress them entirely, we have agreed they must be tolerated, but to ensure they remain a religious institution rather than a governmental power. Spy master to the faithful, Malkador said with dark humor. How appropriately circular. Very well. I accept. The Emperor stepped back, addressing the full council. Understand what we are attempting. We are trying to hold together an empire spanning 1,000,000 worlds while simultaneously undermining the very faith that binds many of those worlds together. We are gambling that rational institutions can replace religious fervor without causing the entire structure to collapse. And we are doing all of this while fighting off traitor legions, Xenos incursions, and demonic corruption. Sounds like a typical decade in the Imperium, Jagatai Khan said with a slight smile. Despite the gravity of the situation, several council members managed brief expressions of grim amusement. Tomorrow, the Emperor said, the Imperium learns that its god refuses to be divine. Let us see if they can accept a leader who admits his limitations while still demanding their loyalty. He dismissed the council, and they departed to their various duties, each carrying a piece of the enormous burden the Emperor had distributed among them. Alone in the Sanctum Imperialis, the Emperor allowed himself a moment of genuine uncertainty. He was about to publicly reject the very faith that had sustained humanity through its darkest hour. He was about to descend into a corrupted alien megastructure to attempt repairs that might prove impossible. And he was about to trust a traitorous son who served the architect of fate himself. Any one of these decisions could destroy the Imperium. Together, they represented humanity's last chance to become something more than worshippers crying out to an uncaring god. The Emperor walked to the chamber's single window, staring out at Terra's scarred surface. Somewhere out there, billions prayed to him, believed in him, needed him to be the divine savior their priests promised. And tomorrow, he would tell them he was just a man trying to save them from themselves. Some chains, he murmured to the empty chamber, can only be broken by those brave enough to admit they exist. The Senatorum Imperialis had never been so crowded. Every tier of the amphitheater was packed with representatives, not just the official delegates, but secondary advisors, military observers, Mechanicus data collectors, and Ministorum witnesses who had demanded the right to hear the Emperor's proclamation directly. The air hummed with tension and barely suppressed anticipation. Cardinal Erebus the Younger stood among his fellow priests, their white robes forming a pale crescent in the upper galleries. They had spent the night in prayer and preparation, certain that the God Emperor would ascend the Golden Throne and formally recognize the Imperial Creed. Some had even prepared liturgies for the coronation of divine acknowledgement. They were about to be devastated. The Emperor entered without fanfare. No trumpets announced him. No honor guard marched in formation. He simply walked through the main doors in his golden armor, alone, and every voice in the chamber died instantly. The psychic weight of his presence was overwhelming, not threatening, but undeniable. This was the being who had conquered the solar system, who had created the Primarchs, who had nearly died stopping the greatest betrayal in human history. He ascended the central dais and stood in perfect silence for a long moment, his gaze sweeping across the assembled thousands. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner without amplification, resonating on frequencies that bypassed mere hearing. I have returned from the vengeful spirit whole and unbowed. Horus Lupercal is dead. The traitor legions flee into the Eye of Terror. This war is won. He paused. But a war's end is when the hardest questions must be answered. The chamber remained silent, thousands holding their collective breath. During my absence, during the years you fought without my direct leadership, something changed in the Imperium. You created stories about me, legends, myths. You built shrines and composed prayers. You transformed the master of mankind into the God Emperor, and you did this because you needed hope when hope seemed lost. I understand why. I do not condemn you for it. Cardinal Erebus felt a surge of relief. This was it, the acknowledgement they had waited for. But I cannot allow it to continue unchallenged. The relief shattered like glass. I am not a god, the Emperor declared, and his words hit the chamber like a physical blow. I am a human being, ancient, powerful, and knowledgeable beyond most comprehension, but human nonetheless. I do not desire worship. I do not demand prayer. I do not offer salvation to those who die in my name. These beliefs, however comforting, are fundamentally incompatible with the Imperium I built, an Imperium founded on reason, science, and human achievement. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The Ministorum delegation looked stricken. Several priests had gone pale, their carefully prepared liturgies crumbling to ash in their minds. However, the Emperor continued, and the chamber stilled again. I am also pragmatic. The Imperial Creed exists. Millions believe in it. Attempting to eradicate that faith by force would cause more harm than the faith itself. Therefore, I offer a compromise. He gestured broadly, encompassing the entire assembly. The Ministorum will be permitted to exist as a religious institution. You may maintain your shrines, conduct your rituals, preach your interpretations of my nature and purpose, but, and his voice hardened like cooling metal, the Ministorum will have no governmental authority. You will not dictate policy. You will not command military forces. You will not declare heresy or enforce theological compliance. You are spiritual advisors, not rulers. The Imperium's governance will remain secular in structure and rational in methodology. Cardinal Erebus found his voice, standing abruptly. My lord, you ask us to preach your divinity while denying us the authority to defend that truth. How can we serve the God Emperor if we cannot protect his faithful from corruption and heresy? The Emperor's gaze fixed on Erebus with terrible intensity. You will serve by inspiring, not commanding, by offering comfort to the suffering, not dictating dogma to the free. If your faith cannot sustain itself through voluntary devotion, if it requires governmental power to enforce compliance, then it is not faith. It is tyranny wearing a spiritual mask. The words hung in the air like an executioner's blade. Lord Commander Sycorax stood, his military bearing a stark contrast to the priest's emotional turmoil. My lord, what of the soldiers who fight in your name? Many derive strength from their belief that you watch over them. If you deny your divinity, will that not weaken their resolve? If my soldiers require the lie of divine protection to fight effectively, then I have failed to build an army worthy of the Imperium, the Emperor said bluntly. But I do not believe that is true. Humanity survived the dark age of technology without gods. You survived the heresy when you believed I was dying. You do not need me to be divine. You need me to be competent, strategic, and committed to your survival. That I can provide. He turned to face Fabricator Kane and the Mechanicus delegation. The Mechanicus has long claimed me as the Omnissiah, the physical manifestation of the machine god's will. I am not that either. I am a scientist who understands technology that most have forgotten. Nothing more. However, I will not forbid you from interpreting my knowledge as divine inspiration, provided you continue to pursue technological advancement rather than stagnant ritual. Kane's mechadendrites twitched, processing the nuanced permission. The Emperor was not endorsing the cult Mechanicus, but neither was he destroying it. Another compromise, another careful balance. Which brings me to my primary announcement, the Emperor said, and his tone shifted from addressing complaints to declaring vision. I will not ascend the Golden Throne. I will maintain the Astronomicon through direct psychic effort, but the throne itself will remain empty. My focus, and the focus of the Imperium's greatest minds and resources, will be directed toward a single objective: repairing and expanding the webway. Confusion rippled through the chamber. Many present had never heard of the Webway project. It was one of the Emperor's most closely guarded secrets, known only to the highest echelons of government and the Mechanicus. The Webway is an ancient network of tunnels through dimensional space, created by the Eldar in ages past, the Emperor explained. Unlike warp travel, which exposes ships to demonic corruption and time distortion, the Webway allows instantaneous travel through stable passages. During the Great Crusade, I worked to create a human-accessible webway that would connect all Imperial worlds. That project was sabotaged during the heresy. He did not mention Magnus by name, but those who knew the truth understood the reference. Now, I will complete what was interrupted. It will take centuries, perhaps millennia. But when finished, humanity will no longer depend on psychers to navigate the warp. We will travel through material infrastructure, safe from chaos corruption. The Astronomicon will become obsolete, and the Imperium will achieve true independence from the forces that seek our damnation. The implications crashed through the chamber like a tidal wave. The navigator houses looked stricken. Their entire existence depended on warp navigation. The Ministorum saw their god emperor declaring a project that would make him unnecessary. The Mechanicus recognized the technological ambition and practically salivated at the possibilities. Guilliman stood from his position among the Primarchs. "My lord, the resource allocation required for such a project will be substantial," the Emperor agreed. "Which is why I am restructuring the Imperium's governance. Rogel Dorn will serve as my Praetorian, the Emperor's direct representative in military and strategic matters. When I am not present, his word carries my authority. Robard Guilliman will codify our administrative systems, creating institutions that function independently of my direct oversight. The Imperium must learn to govern itself, because I will be occupied with the Webway for the foreseeable future." The paternoval envoy of the Navigator houses rose, her withered frame trembling with suppressed fury. "You would make us obsolete, destroy the houses that have served humanity since before the Imperium existed? We're the only reason your ships can cross the galaxy safely. And you have my gratitude for that service," the Emperor said, not unkindly. "But I will not allow humanity to remain permanently dependent on a genetic mutation that makes you vulnerable to chaos corruption. The Navigators have always been a temporary solution. The Webway is the permanent one. You will have centuries to adapt your houses to other purposes. Use that time wisely." The envoy sat down heavily, her third eye weeping tears she could not control. The Emperor had just declared the eventual extinction of her entire culture, delivered with the casual certainty of someone stating objective fact. Cardinal Erebus tried one more time, his voice carrying desperate passion. "My lord, God Emperor, you cannot simply abandon us. The faith that sustained humanity through the heresy, the prayers that gave meaning to sacrifice, the hope that you would return and make everything right. You would declare all of that meaningless, that we worshipped nothing but a particularly powerful man?" The Emperor's expression softened slightly. Not quite sympathy, but recognition of genuine pain. "I do not declare your faith meaningless, Cardinal. Faith has value as a source of comfort, community, and moral structure, but it must not become the foundation of governance. The moment religion gains governmental power, it stops asking questions and starts enforcing answers. That is the path to stagnation, to the suppression of innovation, to the burning of those who think differently. I have seen it happen on 1,000 worlds across human history. I will not permit it in my Imperium." "Then what are we?" Erebus's voice broke. "If not your priests, if not your voice, if not your representatives, what are we?" The Emperor met his gaze with something that might have been respect. "You are human beings trying to find meaning in a cruel universe. You are storytellers, philosophers, counselors to the suffering. These are worthy purposes. But you are not lawmakers, and you are not my intermediaries. Humanity does not need priests to speak to me. I am here, walking among you, available to any who seek audience. The relationship between leader and citizen requires no divine intermediary." He turned to address the full chamber. "I know this is difficult. You spent years building narratives about my sacrifice, my divine nature, my eternal vigil. Those stories helped you survive the worst crisis in human history. I honor that. But the crisis has passed, and now we must build for the future. A future where humanity stands on its own feet, guided by reason, and sustained by our own strength. Not dependent on gods, not shackled by dogma, but free to grow, adapt, and ultimately transcend the limitations that have plagued our species since we first looked up at the stars." The silence that followed was profound and painful. The Emperor had given them truth when they wanted comfort. He had offered them freedom when they wanted certainty. He had refused to be the god they needed him to be, and instead insisted on being the leader they deserved. "This session is concluded," the Emperor declared. Rogel Dorn will address military matters tomorrow. Robout Gilliman will present his administrative codices within the month. The Mechanicus will begin compiling webway research immediately. And he paused, I will descend into the depths beneath the palace and begin the work that will define humanity's future. May reason guide us all. He walked from the chamber without waiting for dismissal protocols, leaving behind a crowd struggling to process the death of their most cherished beliefs. Cardinal Erebus remained standing long after others began to file out. His carefully prepared liturgies lay forgotten in his hands. The God Emperor had rejected divinity. The faith that sustained billions had been declared tolerated but unnecessary. Everything the Ministorum had built during the heresy, the power, the influence, the sense of divine mission, had been stripped away in a single speech. "What do we do now?" a younger priest asked, his voice hollow. Erebus slowly gathered his papers, his mind already racing through possibilities. The Emperor had forbidden governmental authority, but he had not forbidden spiritual influence. He had denied his godhood, but he had not actually stopped the faithful from believing. He had declared himself merely human, but humans did not survive battles that should have killed them, or create genetically perfect warriors from nothing. "We adapt," Erebus said quietly. "The God Emperor does not recognize his own divinity. This is a test of our faith. He walks among us disguised as a man, testing whether we believe because he commands it, or because we know the truth in our hearts. Our mission has not changed. It has only become more challenging." The younger priest looked uncertain. "But he explicitly said—" "He said the Ministorum has no governmental authority," Erebus interrupted. "He did not say we cannot grow our congregation. He did not say we cannot provide comfort and meaning to billions who still believe. He did not say we cannot preserve the truth of his divinity for future generations who will be grateful we did not abandon our faith when it became inconvenient." Understanding dawned on the younger priest's face. "We continue, in the shadows if necessary." "Not shadows," Erebus corrected. "In the light of faith that no secular decree can extinguish. The Emperor has declared himself human, but billions know better. And in time, centuries, perhaps millennia, the Imperium will return to us, because humanity always returns to faith when reason fails them, and reason always fails eventually." He looked up at the empty dais where the Emperor had stood. "You cannot stop what you have become, my lord. Whether you acknowledge it or not, you are the God Emperor, and we will be here, keeping that truth alive, until you finally accept what you are." Far below the Senatorum, deep in the bowels of the Imperial Palace, the Emperor stood before the sealed gateway to the corrupted webway. Demonic energy pulsed against the barriers, testing them constantly, seeking any weakness. Beyond those barriers lay thousands of kilometers of ancient tunnels infested with warp spawn, the legacy of Magnus's greatest mistake. This was his penance and his hope, a project that would consume centuries of his existence, attempting to repair what should never have been broken. Rogel Dorn approached from behind, his footsteps deliberately audible. "The Senatorum is in chaos. Half believe you are testing their faith. The other half believe you have made the greatest mistake in Imperial history." "And you?" the Emperor asked without turning. "I believe you are exhausted from 40,000 years of trying to save a species that keeps finding new ways to damn itself," Dorn said bluntly. "But I also believe this is the right choice. The throne would have destroyed you, not physically, but spiritually. Better to die fighting for a future than to live as a corpse sustained by worship." "Poetic for you." "I have been reading Gilliman's philosophical texts," Dorn admitted. "He suggested it might broaden my perspective. I remain unconvinced, but some passages resonated. The Emperor finally turned to face his most loyal son. The webway may prove impossible. The corruption may be too extensive. Chaos may sabotage every meter of progress. I may labor for 1,000 years and have nothing to show for it except exhaustion and failure. Perhaps, Dorn agreed, but you will have tried. And sometimes, Father, the trying is what defines us, not the success. The Emperor studied Dorn's face, so human despite his transhuman enhancements, so determined despite the weight of impossible duty. When did you become wise? When I realized that even the Emperor of mankind can be wrong, Dorn said, and that admitting that is not weakness, it is the first step toward being right next time. The Emperor placed a hand on Dorn's shoulder, a rare gesture of physical affection. Hold the Imperium together while I am below, my son. Do not let them destroy themselves with their certainty. Not the faithful, not the secular, not the military, or the Mechanicus, or any of the countless factions that think they alone know the truth. I will hold, Dorn promised. I am the Praetorian. It is what I do. The Emperor nodded, then turned back to the sealed gateway. With a thought, the barriers parted, and demonic screams poured through the gap. The stench of the warp, blood and decay and impossible geometries washed over them. Time to begin, the Emperor said, and stepped through into corruption. Behind him, the barriers sealed once more, leaving Dorn alone in the chamber. The Primarch stood guard for several long minutes, listening to the sounds of psychic combat echoing through the sealed gateway. Then he turned and climbed back toward the surface, toward the light, toward the Imperium that needed him to be what his father could not be right now. A present leader, a visible hand, a Praetorian who would hold the walls against all enemies, whether they came from without or within. The Emperor had chosen his path. Now the rest of them would discover if humanity could walk it with him. 3 centuries passed like pages in a book written by indifferent gods. The Emperor labored in the webway's corrupted depths, a solitary figure fighting an endless war against demonic corruption and entropy itself. Progress measured in meters per decade. Victories that lasted hours before chaos surged back to reclaim lost ground. It was brutal, thankless work, the kind that broke ordinary beings within days. But the Emperor was not ordinary, and he had promised himself he would try. Above, the Imperium evolved in ways both predictable and strange. Rogel Dorn died defending Cadia. His body never recovered. But his legacy lived. The Praetorian tradition continued through carefully selected successors who carried the Emperor's authority in his absence. The Space Marines splintered into chapters following Guilliman's Codex, preventing any single commander from wielding Legion-level power. The Administratum grew into a bureaucratic leviathan that somehow kept 1,000,000 worlds coordinated, despite inefficiency that would have driven the Emperor to fury. And the Ministorum, they thrived. Cardinal Erebus the Younger's prediction proved devastatingly accurate. Without the Emperor's visible presence, without his constant reminders that he was merely human, the Imperial Creed filled the vacuum. Each generation of faithful embellished the stories. The Emperor who walked among them became the Emperor who ascended to a higher plane. The man who refused the throne became the god who sacrificed himself anyway, laboring in darkness so humanity could live in light. The shrines multiplied. The prayers grew louder. The faith became indistinguishable from truth in the minds of billions who had never seen the Emperor, never heard his denials, never witnessed anything except the stories told by priests who genuinely believed what they preached. By the year 400 M31, the Ecclesiarchy, as the Ministorum had been formally renamed, held no official governmental power but wielded influence that transcended mere law. They could not command armies, but billions of soldiers prayed before battle. They could not declare heresy legally, but no politician dared oppose them openly. They could not enforce theological compliance, but social pressure accomplished what legislation could not. The emperor had tried to starve the faith through absence. Instead, his absence had made the faith immortal. Deep in the webway, surrounded by wraithbone walls he had personally cleansed of demonic taint, the emperor felt the weight of 10 trillion prayers pressing against his consciousness. He had not prevented his own deification, he had merely delayed acknowledging it. Magnus visited occasionally, psychic projections flickering through the barriers, offering advice that was simultaneously helpful and corrupting. They worked in parallel, father and damned son, repairing what had been broken through pride and ignorance. It was penance for both of them, though neither would admit it aloud. "You are becoming what you feared," Magnus observed during one such visitation, his single eye glowing in the webway's dim half-light. "Not because you sit on a throne, but because they will not let you be anything else. The Imperium needs its god, father. It always did." "Then I have failed," the Emperor replied, his hands still working on ancient mechanisms that predated human civilization. "No," Magnus said quietly. "You gave them a choice. They chose faith over reason, because faith is easier to hold when the galaxy is actively trying to kill you. That is not your failure. That is humanity's nature. You just forgot that you are part of that humanity, not separate from it." The Emperor did not respond. There was nothing to say that had not been said in 10,000 variations over 3 centuries of labor. The Webway project continued. Progress was real, if glacially slow. Sections of tunnel were being purged, stabilized, and reconnected. In another few centuries, perhaps, the first experimental transit could be attempted. In a millennium, maybe 2, the Astronomicon could finally be extinguished, and humanity would travel through dimensional corridors instead of the warp's madness. If the Emperor lived that long without being consumed by the very worship he had tried to prevent, if chaos did not sabotage the project beyond recovery, if the Imperium did not collapse into civil war or Xenos conquest before the Webway could save them. If, always if. On Terra, in the Sanctum Imperialis, where the War Council had once convened, a new generation of leaders debated the same questions their predecessors had argued 3 centuries ago. How to interpret the Emperor's will in his absence, how to balance faith and reason, how to hold together an empire that spanned the galaxy but barely understood itself. They prayed before each session, not because any law required it, but because everyone did it. Even the most secular administrator offered a brief thought to the God Emperor before making decisions that would affect billions. The Emperor had told them he was human, but humans did not labor for centuries without rest. Humans did not maintain a psychic beacon that allowed navigation across the galaxy. Humans did not create Primarchs or survive wounds that should have been instantly fatal. So they had decided, collectively and without any formal decree, that the Emperor was simply wrong about himself. He was divine, whether he acknowledged it or not. And if he would not accept their worship, they would simply continue offering it until he had no choice but to recognize what he had become. Some chains, after all, cannot be broken by the one who wears them. Far below Terra, the Emperor paused in his work. He felt the weight of accumulated faith pressing against his psychic presence like an ocean against a dam. 3 centuries of prayers. 3 centuries of devotion. 3 centuries of humanity deciding that he was their god regardless of his protests. He could feel himself changing, not physically, but spiritually. The boundary between his biological existence and his warp presence was beginning to blur. He was becoming an entity sustained by belief as much as by his own ancient power. Magnus had been right. The throne was not the trap. The trap was existence itself, in a universe where faith shaped reality and humanity desperately needed something to believe in. I tried, the Emperor whispered to the empty webway, to the ancient Eldar stones that had witnessed the birth and death of entire civilizations. I tried to give them reason. I tried to teach them to stand on their own. I tried to be merely human. But humanity had never wanted merely human. They wanted myth, legend, divine purpose that transformed suffering into meaning. And in the end, even the master of mankind could not deny an entire species their most fundamental need, to believe that something greater watched over them in the darkness. The Emperor returned to his work, repairing tunnels that would take 1,000 years to complete, maintaining a beacon that burned with the faith of trillions, becoming slowly and inexorably the god he had spent 40,000 years refusing to be. Some prayers are answered not because they are heard, but because refusing them would be more catastrophic than accepting them. And in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, where there is only war, the greatest irony was this: the Emperor's humanity was his last sacrifice, offered not on a golden throne, but through 10,000 years of labor in darkness, becoming divine so that humanity might survive, to one day transcend the need for gods. Whether that day would ever come remained uncertain, but the Emperor would continue working toward it, even if doing so required him to become the very thing he had fought against. Because that, in the end, was what it meant to truly love humanity, to give them what they needed, even when it destroyed what you hoped to be.